Hey guys, it's Baz, and well, don't mind me. I'm just feeling a little fancy today. I got my first piece of official Baz Reviews fan mail. It was sort of weird though. It was from this mad scientist that gave me this truth serum to put in my coffee. Like that would even work for a sec. Holy shit. A whole lot of red might not be as bad as I remember it.
Do you guys remember when I had a blog? What about a podcast? If you do, you're awesome. But for those of you who are newer subscribers or just clicked this video knowing nothing about me, my initial intention with Baz Reviews was for it to be a little place for me to publish album reviews. And here we are now. So, seeing how I have almost 4 years worth of album review data under my belt, would you be surprised if I admitted that I've messed up on a few here and there? I mean, I'd be concerned if you didn't, and while I stand by most of the scores I've given to albums in the YouTube era, I think some of my earliest reviews should be addressed. I was still getting my footing in the music landscape, plus my music tastes and understanding of music have changed quite a bit. I've been taking some time away from reviewing music, so I felt like it was the right time for me to go back to some of my most controversial review scores, discuss my shortcomings on each, and rescore them as a more mature critic. Let me quickly brief you on my usual reviewing standards, which nominally is the Baz scale. It's a 0 to 10 scale with half-point increments. A score lower than a 4 is considered negative, a 4.5 to a 6.5 indicates varying levels of indifference, and anything above a 7 is positive. I've also linked all of the reviews if you'd like to see my original takes, but with all that out of the way, I present to you albums I've changed my opinion on. I wanted to start off my list with Steve Lacy's debut album, Apollo 21. In my first review, I was disappointed with the album because I was so used to hearing his big hits like Dark Red or See Girl. I was expecting a bedroom pop type record from him, and was sort of confused when I heard an experimental funk and soul album. Since both of these genres have made their way into the mainstream since that time, I warmed up to the concept of the album a little bit more. My criticism on the album's cohesion still stands, but I had a change of heart on Like Me, Playground, and Basement Jaxx, plus Hate CD and Love Too Fast later on. This gets a pretty significant bump from a 4.5 to a 7.5 out of 10. I've had similar issues with a group like Clipping and have never been sure what to expect from them. It seems like they either go into the studio in a good headspace, are fully motivated, and make a good album, or they're not, and the resulting product ends up being underwhelming. I did a classic review of their debut back in early 2019, and I've heard a few more of their records after the fact, so I wanted to go back and see if my indifference was still valid. As you could guess, I didn't have much of an education in noise rap. At least I can say I warned everybody to take my review with a grain of salt. Now that I do know more about it, I can say that 1, Clipping is not at all like Death Grips like I first said, and 2, a lot of the instrumentals on here are way cooler than I remember. Most importantly, this might just edge out There Existed an Addiction to Blood as my favorite Clipping album. Inside Out and Story 2 are timeless, and Summertime, Taking Off, Or Die, and Ends are a prime example of great production. Plus, Daveed Diggs is doing that rapping thing of his pretty well, so it's in my best interest to raise this album from a 6 up to a 7.5 out of 10. When I first reviewed Earl Sweatshirt's 2019 EP Feet of Clay, I think the overwhelming praise I had for some rap songs clouded my judgment. It was those new project jitters that gave me a weird urge to try and contend that it was almost as good as that album was. In reality, it goes from being one of my favorite Earl projects to being pretty much the worst in about 145 words from now. As I go back to it today, I see how the reception was more lukewarm. What holds it back is Earl sounding despondent and disinterested. Obviously, I'm sure that was his intention with this EP, but at least I could sit through his depression and hear good music at the same time on some rap songs. Right now, I'd say that 74, El Toro Combo Meal, and Tisk Tisk Cookies are the only salvageable cuts on here, and it's only because the production carries those tracks. I had no change of heart on 4N and MTOMB, plus Live is just painfully pedestrian by today's standards, and yeah, I wasn't expecting East to be that big of a meme either, so my opinion changed on that too. My initial score was an 8.5, but it's more in the 6.5 or 7 territory as I re-rate it. Slowthai's Nothing Great About Britain is another rap record that failed to hold up to my initial praise. After a while, I realized that the album is a bit all or nothing for me. Unexpectedly, I think it's been forgotten about by hip-hop fans too. To think that this record was, at one point, an 8 out of 10 and on my top 10 albums of 2019 is kinda crazy. Dead Leaves and Northampton's Child are the few tracks I'll revisit on the main album because Rainbow and North Nights are 2 of the 5 digital bonus tracks he added to the record. Those, along with Drug Dealer and Ladies, are some of the best the album had to offer. I guess he also removed TN Biscuits from the track list, which was one of the few songs I enjoyed too. Now that Slowthai is a bit further on in his career, Tyrant is just a much more complete album. The dreamier vibe is where quite a few of the songs on here could have reached their full potential in my opinion. In the end, this will drop a couple of points down to a 6 out of 10. I was also way too generous with my score on 'Cause I Love You by Lizzo. It's funny to go back and review pop music that's just a few years old, because you start noticing the volume of music that ages like shit. The proof is in the pudding here. Lizzo was just one of those musicians who was in it to make trendy stuff. The lyrics are copy-paste, and a lot of the songs sound way more overproduced than I remembered. I only chose to review it mainly because of how popular it was, and I still think it has its good moments, but the Lizzo burnout became fully realized after I heard Good as Hell and Juice at my job for a couple of months, followed by Exactly How I Feel, Boys, and Truth Hurts on TikTok. Just compare some of the other songs I just mentioned to other trendy pop songs from the 2000s or 2010s. Yeah, I think we all might have grown tired of hearing Gangnam Style by Psy or Shake It Off by Taylor Swift, but they gave you a damn good reason to remember them. 'Cause I Love You was a different story, and all of those factors led me to bring my initial 9 out of 10 score all the way down to a 6.5. On the other hand, I feel like the original 5.5 I gave to Pray for Paris by Westside Gunn was a bit unfair. It was my first Griselda record that I listened to, and I've been way more lenient with other rappers that have put out far less appealing music. Although the record is still messy to me as it was in the beginning, and the features do carry a lot of the songs, I'm not as critical of Westside's performances now. He is an acquired taste, so you really need to listen to more than just one album to fully understand the scope of his music. I've been going deeper into the back catalog of Griselda stuff recently, and I don't know what the hell I was saying when I called 500 Ounces and Party with Pop Smoke some of the most deplorable rap songs of 2020. Those beats are just incredible, and the same can be said for the flows. That and George Bondo sounds like more of a complete song to me than on a first listen. If I were to re-rate this album, it would be getting somewhere around a 7 or 7.5. It's still far from an elite Griselda album, but it was one I'm glad I could come to appreciate. I was also wrong with my first impression of Thom Yorke's Anima. At the time I reviewed it, I wasn't as well versed in IDM or ambient music and was more or less expecting something that resembled some of my favorite Radiohead projects. I now understand that isn't really the point of artists' solo albums. They're meant to branch off the creative path they've been so used to working for so long. If I were to re-rank my top 10 albums from 2019, this would definitely be on the list. Even if I'm still not a fan of I'm a Very Rude Person or The Axe, Dawn Chorus is still amazing, and songs like Last I Heard, Twist, Not the News, Impossible Knots, and Runaway Way are just as enjoyable. I'm giving Anima a 2-point increase from a 6.5 to an 8.5 out of 10. The New Abnormal by The Strokes was another album I don't think I could understand when I first reviewed it. I hadn't heard much of Angles or Come Down Machine when I was reviewing it, so criticizing their drastic switch of sonic identity made very little sense when I reread my initial review. While the rescore of a 7 to an 8 out of 10 is not as significant as some of the other releases I've talked about, this album made me realize that the Strokes have more material in their catalog that I'd want to revisit. It's no longer me wanting to hear Room on Fire or Is This It? This album has just as much of a dog in that fight. I still loved all of the tracks I enjoyed at the time of my review, but Brooklyn Bridge to Chorus and Ode to the Mets became two of my new favorites. The Strokes were also one of my most listened to groups in the last year, and I attribute The New Abnormal to being the reason why. And of course, the only way I could have finished out my video on rescoring albums was with Playboi Carti's Whole Lotta Red. Yes, I am now officially retiring one of the running jokes on the channel and admitting I completely fucked up with my first review. I was way too harsh with it, and going back to it now, I can say there are quite a few songs that I misjudged. I've gotten deeper into the cloud rap scene since I published my first review, so I definitely appreciated the production on here a lot more. Along with my first favorites New Neon, Place, and Over, I really liked Slayer, Control, I Love You, I Hate You, Die for Guy, and Not Playing. With all that in mind, I do want you to notice how 4 of the 5 songs I liked come at the end of the record rather than throughout it. It's just that Carti took the best thing about this album, not doing his annoying baby voice, and added it in here. If the inconsistency was no longer a factor, I think this would be getting much more of a positive score for me. That's not to say that going from a 1.5 out of 10 to a 6 is the easiest thing to do, but hey, if there's anybody that would do it, it's Playboi Carti. And when an artist's work is reviewed at the time of its release, the thoughts of the reviewers can sometimes be incorrect. As you can see, I learned that the hard way. Through it all, though, it's my belief that music reviews should not be taken as an objective statement about music. They're just a way that a writer or publication with a specific taste feels about a record. In addition, reviews are like open records that can be changed over time. Revisiting albums is another natural and necessary part of music criticism. As time passes and we remove our former biases and ignorances, we can learn how we truly feel about a piece of music as reviewers and listeners. I will say, it certainly was a fruitful adventure going back to my earliest reviews and reading the language within them. If you've clicked off to read them, the commentary is not very strong. I was going off of what I knew at the time or felt safe saying instead of analyzing the music for what it was. The scores I first gave these projects were also pretty reflective of that. but it taught me a lot. With this video, I imagined it being like a math teacher giving me the option to make corrections if I did poorly on an exam. Since time is no longer a constraint, I could now sit down, figure out where I went wrong, and piece together a stronger answer as a result. Music is an art form where everything changes at a rapid rate. When new releases come out and we grow deeper with it, it's important that we revisit past albums we initially enjoyed or disliked to see if our perspectives have changed.
Well, I think this truth serum's just about worn off. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't a pretty interesting experience. You know, don't know if I'd ever do it again, but hey, glad I tried it. And funny thing is, he gave me another serum. Twitter is good. This should do it. So,